Seltzer water. Ford vs. Ferrari, or Ford v. Ferrari, depending on how people want to say it. It was released in 2019, stars Matt Damon, Christian Bale, and it was directed by James Mangold, the same guy who's actually slated to direct Indiana Jones 5. Now, I'm a huge fan of the Indiana Jones movies, but the first three. The first three are the good ones, and then from there they kind of... I don't know what they were thinking with Crystal Skull. That was just weird. Maybe I'll talk about that in another video, but now's not the time. Ford v. Ferrari takes place in the mid-60s, and it tells the story of Henry Ford II. He wanted to try and make a difference with his legacy with Ford, so he kind of was trying to branch away from like family-friendly sedans to more sports cars. So he decides to try to make a race car out of Ford and win the Le Mans. He tries to just buy out Ferrari, but after they refuse, he just assembles his own team, gives them a bunch of money, and they end up winning. The team ends up being the Matt Damon and Christian Bale. Matt Damon plays Carroll Shelby, who's kind of the designer of the sports car he's going to be building, and Christian Bale plays Ken Miles, like an expert driver. There's some drama that goes back and forth between Henry Ford and his team, and between the team and each other, but I mean the point is they win. Altogether, I think this is kind of an interesting time for this movie to come out. Electric cars right now are really booming, and I mean whether you like it or not, they're taking a lot of the attention away from muscle cars. Their acceleration is a lot more intense, and a lot of adrenaline junkies are kind of jumping on the Tesla bandwagon. So I guess this movie could kind of be seen as like a retaliation against that, but I see it more as kind of an affectionate throwback. The movie has a lot of scenes and dialogue that really worship just muscle cars and the idea of driving fast, almost to the point of just outright fetishizing it. I mean, I wrote down a couple of quotes that I think really illustrate this the best. Let me kind of set the scene. So, this is Carroll Shelby's introduction, and he's kind of driving through traffic really quickly, and you hear this voiceover. There's a point at 7,000 RPMs where everything disappears, and you're just a body moving through space and time. I mean, maybe Carroll Shelby really said that. He probably did because of the fact that, I mean, he is such a racing legend. But, I mean, it sets the tone for the entire movie. Every character is like this. Christian Bale has a scene where his character, Ken Miles, is sitting on a racetrack with his son, and he's telling his son, you have to be kind to the car. You have to feel the thing groaning beneath you. It's almost like this, sexualization of driving fast. Ken's wife even joins the party. During her introduction, she says, I love the sound they make. The vibration, the way it goes right through you. And, I mean, people must have loved it. Because, I mean, if you take a look at this movie was well received. It got an 8.1 on IMDb, 92% on Rotten Tomatoes, 81% on Metacritic, 94% of Google users liked it. Even still, I couldn't like this movie. That's not to say it was a bad movie, I guess. I mean, it was good for what it was trying to do. I guess I was just expecting something different. I was expecting Ford versus Ferrari. You know, I was expecting us to have a team on the Ford side and a team on the Ferrari side that we would kind of, get to know. I was expecting there to be a little more like a human element on the Ferrari side that we just didn't see the whole time. There were no characters from the Ferrari side that we were given the opportunity to get to know, and it made the whole dynamic very one-dimensional. It was very much a letdown for me. I mean, Ferrari, whether you like it or not, are a very successful car company. They're very innovative, and they're like handcrafted machines. It would have been great to have that representation in the movie, but we didn't get any of it. We just focused on the heroes the whole time. Sure, we had a little bit of back and forth between the corporate side of Ford and the racing side, but it wasn't enough for me. I really wanted the characters on the Ferrari side to be flushed out a little bit more. I suppose that problem is kind of my fault. I suppose I could have watched the trailers and got more familiar with the movie. I just saw Christian Bale and Matt Damon and just assumed one of them would be on Team Ford and one of them would be on Team Ferrari, but we didn't get that. Something else that really bothered me about this movie is all the main characters anyway, even some of the side characters, were just real know-it-alls. I felt like if there's a character that we were supposed to identify with, the way they went about making that connection to the audience was just to have them spout off all kinds of knowledge, just to kind of assert themselves and become like a forefront person in that field. And I felt like a lot of it was kind of unearned. Like when we first get introduced to Ken, he's a mechanic working in the shop, and we see him kind of talking down to a customer, telling him exactly what's wrong with his car, and we're just supposed to take his word for it. That happened a little too quick for me. Even Ken's wife, a few minutes later, she comes into the scene as the customer's driving off, and she's like, "Wasn't that a MGA 1500?" Just like, she didn't even come close enough to look at the car. She was just like way off in the distance, and we're just supposed to assume that she just knows exactly what she's talking about. And then later scenes in the movie, when Ken is driving a car, he'll just drive a car and then he brings it back and he just starts to recite exactly what's wrong with the car. And then while Ken is racing, Shelby's like off to the sideline, like watching him, like reciting out loud what his tactics are as he drives. I mean, I guess people could do that with cars. I don't know a lot about cars myself, so I guess I'm kind of talking out of my ass. But, I mean, I do know quite a bit about computers, and I can't just go to somebody's house and just start up their computer and just listen to it start up and think, oh, this thing needs a new, whatever. And that's what I felt like they were doing with these characters, was kind of giving them all, like, this encyclopedia-type knowledge just at their fingertips. I guess even if it is possible for people to have that kind of knowledge about cars, it would have been nice to show, like, the work that went into getting that kind of knowledge. Maybe show some tinkering, show them like working on a car themselves or kind of figuring something out on their own. We get a few scenes of like they're being like in a shop working on an engine, but it's always the side characters who are like kind of building all the stuff that they require, and then they're kind of looking over, kind of like in passing, like real short scenes. There's no real scenes of Shelby or Ken really kind of getting their hands dirty themselves, kind of learning what's going on. One more thing about everybody being a know-it-all before I move on. There's a scene in the beginning of the movie where Ken is trying to get into a race and the inspector comes by. And the inspector just like recites out loud. I had to write this down because I can't remember this quote. He says, paragraph 15.4, section 2B of the SCCA standard dictates all AF class cars must have a minimum trunk space of 20 inches by 12 inches by 6 inches. I mean, who just knows this? What inspector knows every single rule in the rule book? At least have him, rummaging through a few pages. And if that wasn't like awkward enough, Ken gets up and just like recites the rule book back to him exactly, like word for word. I mean, come on. And every time a character spouts off some like know-it-all quote, it just keeps pulling me out of the moment. So constantly I found these characters just not quite believable. I also didn't like the way America was depicted in this movie. I mean, I say America loosely. This is Ford versus Ferrari, but I mean, it's America versus Italy, really, is kind of what you boil this down to. Henry Ford's first option is just to buy out Ferrari. Ferrari refuses, and for a moment in that scene, Ferrari's kind of made to look like the bad guy. But, I mean, Ford's retaliation on that is just totally over the top. Like, Henry Ford is completely insulted that some other car manufacturer across the Atlantic Ocean would insult him and his company. Like, get some thicker skin, will you? Well, he's so sensitive that he decides he's just going to spend an unlimited amount of money to assemble this team. So we got this rich American who can't handle any sort of criticism, now shoveling out endless money to win a competition. I mean, how American is that, right? By the end of the movie, when they finally get to Le Mans, the Ford team just flat out cheats. The Ford's pit team is like right next to Ferrari's pit team, so Shelby just kind of like wanders his way over there and like takes their stopwatches, throws a lug nut to make them all confused about whether or not they did the pit correctly. I guess that's not the best example of cheating, but I mean, that's just some pretty shady behavior. And I was really disappointed to see the American team be portrayed that way. Even if it really happened. I mean, if that's how it went down, there should have been some sort of like shame on you moment. The way they filmed it, it kind of glorified that type of behavior. How American is that, right? And those are kind of my big gripes about the movie. Like I said before, I mean, this is a good movie. It is well crafted. I mean, the race scenes are like second to none. These are some really good scenes. The tight angles and the low camera really lets you see how fast they're going. And at one point, Ken is having trouble with his brakes. And, I mean, you're on the edge of your seat because the way it's being filmed really lets you know, I mean, how much danger he's potentially in if these brakes go out. I did get to learn a lot about cars. Maybe taking the main character's word for it isn't necessarily the best way I like to get that type of information. I would have liked a little more showing, but, I mean, the information was there, so I got to get that. All the good, it's just so inhibited by the bad. I wasn't able to really get along with the characters. I don't really like that whole know-it-all attitude, kind of I'm too cool for you attitude. It just kind of put me off, I guess. So, I mean, I watched the whole movie through, but I was never like with it. I was never really into it. I was always just kind of watching it as kind of a passive observer. I'd like to know what you think. I know this is an unpopular opinion. I mean, this is a very well-received movie, but I'd like to know, I mean, does anybody else out there think this movie is a little bit overrated? Use the comment section down below. Let me know what you think. As always, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I post new videos every single week, and subscribing lets you stay up to date on what I'm watching. And until next time, let's not just watch movies. Let's talk about them too.